The Oscars have been pushed back to April. Kevin Jagernauth, what do we have to say about the new dates?
The big change. I mean, obviously, with the pandemic happening, there's a lot of productions that were aiming to finish for the award season that went on hold. So it buys a lot of films a couple of extra months to sort of maybe resume production this summer, get into post, and get ready for whatever the award season turns out to be. So I think this is certainly uh, a move that will benefit studio films. But it does put some of the indie films that have come out already this year at a bit of a disadvantage. I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, we have films like First Cow and Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always that might have to work a bit harder.
Yes, indeed. I'll delve more into that with report to how the Indie Spirits sort of like made a tone-deaf decision. Total disservice to the smaller films. I guess my first concerns are with regards to the film festival circuit, how it's ultimately going to disrupt what Telluride, TIFF, and Venice are. I think my concerns lie there. And I jokingly said that we might expect a Sundance 2021 edition to be an edition where we see 10 Manchesters by the Seas. I think that's where there's going to be some major disruption. If you're a film that normally gets released in December, are you now waiting until February? And I think the answer might be yes.
So when is the new cutoff date now for eligibility? Is it February?
I believe we're looking at the first day of February as preliminary voting essentially begins then. So it means the infamous month where Liam Neeson films actioneer films in January now becomes the new December, I guess. So the voting begins at the beginning of February, and the second wave would take place in March. So yeah, the Indie Spirit Awards sort of, they always play the day before the Oscars, and I think they missed out on a golden opportunity here by quickly announcing that they would move their dates to the day before, again in April. I think in a treasure trove year so far, where we do have, as you mentioned, the Kelly Reichardt film, the Eliza Hittman film. We also have films like Bull, Annie Silverstein's film. We have the even smaller films like The Surrogate and Swallow that played at Tribeca in 2019 and sort of had this beautiful stretch of screenings and award wins at a multitude of film festivals. The Indie Spirit Awards sort of like do a major disservice to everything that's sort of come out theatrically or even virtually. And I can understand in a normal sense how they want to sort of like play the day before the Oscars, just because financially it makes sense. The talent's already there. But as last year reminded us, is like, you know, when Adam Sandler won for the Safdie film, you know, he wasn't participating the day after at the Oscars, and I think they didn't have to follow suit. They didn't have to go along with the Oscars, and I think out of the two award ceremonies, they're the ones that are doing a major disservice to films under that, I think it's $20 million budget range. I'm peed off a little bit by that choice.
Yeah, it's I mean, like you, I understand it. I understand the move from like a financial perspective and from the perspective of wanting to get visibility, but visibility on the awards doesn't necessarily mean visibility on the films that you would think that the indie spirits want to champion. So again, it'll be an interesting season. I mean, there's so many factors still up in the air. Your festival comment is a good one. Like, what does it mean for Sundance? What does it mean for AFI even? AFI might have a bigger role this year than they ever have.
Well put.
And again, if there's a second wave, if there's another wave of infection and productions have to shut down again, that'll be another issue to deal with.
Yeah, there's still a lot of head scratching, and I mean, ultimately, it could help out the Oscars, but for the indie spirits, again, there was no need to push it back. They could have easily have done it for the latter years and just returned to the regular format. But here they had an opportunity to sort of like stake a claim, bring out that megaphone. And I think a lot of the people that would have been nominated wouldn't even have known what their Oscar fate would have been, seeing that the nominations process would have begun the moment a little bit after the ceremony would have taken place. So yeah, big an opportunity that was missed on their part. Moving along, so the Cannes Film Festival market, the virtual market, takes place next week. And the week before, which is the week that just passed, we saw a lot of huge projects being put out there. And it was nice to see that a lot of the trades were offered more intel, I guess more descriptive info in terms of what the filmmakers were looking to do with the projects, and it wasn't just like a 2-sentence description of their projects, but actually we get a lot of insight into how casting was put together. And so yeah, a lot of these projects normally at the Cannes Film Festival, about half of them, we hear about them one day, and then like 3 years later, it's like, what happened to this project? But the films that we're going to talk about, I get a sense that we'll be hearing about these, and that a lot of the pre-packaging that's been put together might actually occur. So I think the first title out of all the items that we cherry picked is the Pablo Larrain film. So Kevin, if you want to just give some descriptive info on what we can expect with Spencer.
So Spencer finds Larrain once again shifting focus to a woman in power. So he previously made Jackie, about Jackie Kennedy with Natalie Portman, and now he'll be making a film called Spencer with Kristen Stewart slated to play Princess Diana. And the interesting thing is the framework for this film is very similar to Jackie. It'll take place over a few days. In this case, it'll be over the Christmas holidays, and it will be about Princess Di's decision, her realization that her marriage to Prince Charles isn't working. So it's a fascinating moment in the life of a British royal who is still the object of fascination and obsession by many. And I think the interesting thing for me here is, with Jackie, it wasn't a movie about Jackie Kennedy. It was about so much more. It was about power and what it takes to sort of hold that role and be in the public eye. And I think this will be another opportunity for Larrain to explore those similar themes. And he has a script by Stephen Knight, who, when Stephen Knight's on, he creates some really, really great work. So I'm pretty excited. It's quite a shift. I mean, I loved Emma, Larrain's last film. Totally wild, beautiful film, out on its own planet. And so this seems like a shift, like to do something a bit more contained, a bit more with a singular focus. So I don't know. What are your thoughts? How did you react on hearing this?
Well, if you're, as we're referencing Emma, I too, I think it was a very divisive film. I think that it was an either you love it or hate it film. And what I particularly appreciate about that character is the sense of empowerment and free will of the character, and her making her own power moves within her. I don't want to say confined space, but in her
Community, you would say, maybe.
yeah, and sort of like the life decisions that she made, she owns up to them, and sort of like, you know, puts a Molotov cocktail spirit to her future moves. And so my first reaction was, Stewart is coming off Seabird, and two films back, Pablo Larrain and Jackie. I think both films sort of like remind us that the biopic is safe territory when attacked by a sort of like a creative angle, and so I think those two items sort of build our confidence boosters, and it is a mythic, it is a huge character to place one's shoes in, and I'm totally game to see what those two will bring together. I think how it's packaged, like, so Stephen Knight, you know, he touches upon a lot of Brit stories. I think back to Dirty Pretty Things, and a lot of the Peaky Blinders, and his more current filmography, if you will, in television. I think it's something that's part of the huge tapestry, a collective memory. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how Larrain can approach what is a 72-hour span in a more nuanced fashion, and really tap into what isolation might have looked like, and a bit of introspection, and how Lady Diana really was at a crossroads in her life. So I think there's a lot of matter here, and it could almost be a silent film. And I think Kristen Stewart could tap into a lot of things that she could relate to, just being in a sphere where she, you know, she was very much hunted by the paparazzi herself, and can certainly relate to certain aspects of what it is to be, you know, hounded by the public, and sort of like living within a bubble within a larger bubble. So there's a lot going for this project, but yeah, it's going to be a curiosity piece for sure.
Yeah, you bring up some excellent points, but the two that stick out for me is, you're right. Kristen Stewart has certainly lived a life where, you know, where there's the public perception of who she is versus who the private perception, and that's probably something Princess Diana also has struggled with. And you're right, the biography format is always served best when it's blown up a little bit. So I think they're going to do that here. Production on this starts in 2021, so this could be a 2022 contender.
Yeah, and here's hoping that the actress you know, digs down, and I particularly liked her in Olivier Assayas's film. I'm forgetting the title right now, but
Personal Shopper.
Yeah, Personal Shopper, and I think she could relate to that character on some level. And yeah, for sure, if this goes into production in 2021, it's going to be just a massive, most anticipated title the year after. Moving along to the Zellner Brothers, who have given us a lot of micro indie since 1997. I've been tapped into their filmography since they've been making short films. A lot of those have played at Sundance and South by Southwest. and they're attached to a project that they've been writing called Alpha Gang, and this one's just going to blow out everything that they've done in the past out of the water very quickly. Perhaps you can discuss the casting and yeah, what were your immediate reactions to hearing that we're going to get an alien film via the perspective of the aliens?
So my first reaction is, if there's a nomination, if there's an Oscar for casting, whoever put this together deserves it. The cast assembled for this film is bonkers. We have John Hamm, Nicholas Hoult, Charlotte Gainsbourg, Mackenzie Davis, Sophia Boutella, and Stephen Ewan. That is a cast alone for
Andrew Riseborough is at the top of that as well.
Yeah, that's right. For any film, that would be massive. For the Zellners, I mean, this is easily their most star-packed cast they've ever had. I mean, their previous films have tended to be, a little more small scale, a little more contained, but this is a sci-fi alien comedy. It's about aliens who come to Earth to conquer us, but they become they catch the most toxic disease of all, which is apparently emotion. So where plans for world domination unravel. It's a great premise. It is a premise that fits what we expect from the Zellners, which is always something a little bit off the beaten path, but clearly there's something in this material that is attracting this level of talent, which is very intriguing. I mean, what were your thoughts when you this first crossed your inbox?
Well, I was thinking about how the actors perhaps had access to their last two features, really kooky features, and very much they were really aware of the setting and the worlds that they create. So I'm talking, of course, about Kimiko the Treasure Hunter and Damsel, which was a very comedic, different take on the Western. And the character sets in these worlds are, you end up remembering these characters because they're so rich and they're so diverse. Perhaps less so with Kimiko, because that very much is a solitary experience. But the filmmakers have a kinship to these oddball folks, and I think they're curious about the human experience through their quirks. So in amassing a sort of like an ensemble cast like this, my first thought is oh, that must be complicated on paper. How I can imagine that for the aliens to sort of experience or be flushed with empathy towards the human race, they're going to have a lot of one-on-ones. So are we going to split an ensemble and they're each going to have their own sort of one-offs a la, Jonathan Glazer's film with Scarlett Johansson? Are we gonna? Is it gonna be difficult to mesh all these characters together and have them sort of relate to one another's experience? But then I think it's also a sign of the times. I think politically, what's lacking in the leadership in the U.S. is sort of that empathy and kindness towards your fellow person. And I'm not talking about the general populace. I'm talking about obviously who happens to be the president. So I wonder how that screenplay sort of how it rised above perhaps other things that they were working on. What's encouraging is, I love these producers. We have Adele Romansky and Sarah Murphy of the Pastel production company, and they had worked with, of course, on the Oscar winner, and I'm forgetting the title, Moonlight. And so it's a production company that was involved in the Lisa Hitman's film. So they're very picky and choosy. And I think for them, it's certainly going to be a larger canvas. And I might say a lot about Underground Railroad. I'm forgetting the filmmaker's name. Help me out here.
Underground Railroad?
Well, the Moonlight director.
Barry Jenkins.
Yes, Barry Jenkins. So yeah, he's part of that production company as well. So, so yeah, it's going to be a hefty. It feels like a heftier project, not necessarily because of sci-fi elements, but just because it's being shot in Europe and yeah, weighty cast.
Weighty cast. Certainly something that sounds like it's on a bigger scale than they've ever made before.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, there's certainly a lot of opportunity to use this premise to speak politically about the state of the world. So it sounds like something that's very ambitious, which is exciting from filmmakers like these. So one to watch out for.
Let's talk about other ensembles that have been put together. Again, another project that's going to be huge for the market. I think we've been discussing James Gray's upcoming 8th feature on a couple of episodes. We were quite enthusiastic about Cate Blanchett being the first to join what we perceive to be a film about the upbringing of Donald Trump, which might not necessarily be the case as the latest news headline and Deadline sort of like fleshed out what the cast might look like, but also gave an opportunity to James Gray to sort of delve into just how close this project is to him. So yeah, let's talk about this exciting cast and what it means for James Gray to sort of perhaps go down a road that's a lot closer to his own experiences.
So yeah, so James Gray has been putting together Armageddon time for a little while now. A lot of the coverage has been about the Trump connection, but I believe James Gray has said, in previous interviews, that element of it is not really the focus. It's part of that world certainly, but it's not about Donald Trump. Donald Trump's father does play a role in the film, not the actual person, but the character. But it sounds to me more like a coming of age story. And the cast, again, this would be running neck and neck with Alpha Gang for an Oscar if there was a casting Oscar. I mean, we have Robert De Niro, Oscar Isaac, Donald Sutherland returning to work with James Gray after Ad Astra, Anne Hathaway joining Cate Blanchett. So huge cast, and it's a film set in the 80s. It's it's about two kids who aged 11 and 12 making their way through a world of privilege, and how that affects one character who, from what I understand, adjusts better to the scenario, and the other who sort of goes down a path that's maybe not quite so certain. But James Gray his films have a connective thread of really focusing on outsiders and understanding people who have maybe fallen through the cracks a bit, who have been outside of the system, who have to sort of struggle to be recognized. Mm-hmm. So I think it's following on a thread that he's carried throughout his films. But obviously this is drawing on his own experience. I mean, he went to school in New York. He went to I believe he went to a private school. So this is something that's going to be, I mean, all of his films have been touched with personal elements, but this sounds like his most personal to date.
Mm-hmm. I'm getting a sense that a lot of the actors that you just named are going to be strong, part of the strong supporting cast. But it really does appear as if our vantage point is going to be from a person who's 10, 11, 12 years old. And I think that's something that's fairly new to the filmmaker. So whoever gets cast as the kid who was part of the privileged system and who got a chance at redeeming themselves and saw how unfair a system could be. It's going to come from a really interesting perspective, and ultimately a lot of the chance encounters and mistakes that we sort of have to go through as a child, I think plays out later in life. And I think James Gray perhaps saw just how fortunate he was in sort of getting a pass, I guess, depending on where he goes with this character. But yeah, I think it's going to be a really personal project, and say a lot about the institutions that can make or break a human life at a very young age.
That's very well said. I mean, as we're talking about this, I can't help but think of We Own the Night and Joaquin Phoenix and Mark Wahlberg's characters, how their paths were so different. And I feel like, maybe this film is sort of not connected, but obviously, but, maybe it's from the perspective of, what were those characters like, what were those characters like as kids? Like what were the paths that, as you say, started them down the roads they ended up taking? So really, really rich material from James Gray here.
Yeah, chance, circumstance, and yeah, who you're surrounded by have a lot to say in how we turn out. Speaking of going back in the past, the next project that was of note, Faster, Cheaper. I felt like doing I'll do the faster, cheaper, more productive.
Faster, cheaper, better.
Cheaper, better.
More productive.
Whatever. So a project that's being put together by Film Nation for the Cannes market is actually, when I read this trade headline, I was thinking back to a piece by 60 Minutes I had seen about 2 months ago. And essentially what it told us is that the trucking industry as we know it is going through a major overhaul. And there's been a couple of test situations where it's been manned by nobody. These trucks have been driven by these Tesla type companies. And there's this major race to making entire fleets driverless. And so that harkens back to what's happening right now, a major disruption in an industry where I think a lot of people relate to truckers as these working class heroes. So yeah, Gilroy, let's first tap into sort of like his filmography and what you think about a project that spans 20 years.
So Dan Gilroy has never been short on big ideas for his films. I mean, Nightcrawler, even though it was a small film, was unique, really interesting, sort of sharp edge to look at the media.
Mm-hmm.
And then he took a couple swings. He tried to take on the art world with a Velvet Buzzsaw, and to be honest, I'm still trying to understand what he was trying to do with Roman J. Israel, Esquire, and then both of those films were mixed. After the high of Nightcrawler, they were a little bit of a disappointment. But I mean, he's a great screenwriter. He's a huge talent. So, you can't help but be interested by what he's cooking up here, a film about the future, really, the future where people are not really needed to do the sort of labor that defines the middle class, really. Mm-hmm. That really is the foundation of middle class life right now as we know it. So really, really interesting territory, but whether this is, I mean, we don't know. Is this going to be a comedy? Is this another sort of Nightcrawler or Velvet Buzzsaw scenario, or is he going to play it more straight? I mean, I think that will really define how this film works or doesn't work.
So Gilroy's tapping into a couple of mindsets here. He's tapping into, again, the drivers who, they sacrifice their lives in a way to a career that's that's gratifying on some level, but that's misunderstood and not really appreciated by many. And he also taps into the young entrepreneur who wants to sort of play a huge part in an industry that societies are entirely dependent on. From what I understand, is this is going to be developed as a sort of like a mapped out strategy with multitude of with characters. So I'm thinking back to like Altman's films or stuff like Crash or Magnolia that have like this mapped out strategy. And so I think we're going to get a lot of slice of lives and be able to better understand the mindset of the capitalist front, but also meat and potatoes type existences. I think we'll be able to identify with these characters as technologies like I'm attached to my phone and to this laptop that we're using now, and what's the future going to look like 20 years from now? I think very much going to live in a robot world.
I mean, yeah, it's where things are going, but again, it's all about what is the human cost, for convenience and automation. At what point does it become detrimental in a sense to how we can live and survive? But this is it's also an argument that's as old as like the industrial age. So again, a lot of opportunity here, a lot of territory to cover, and it'll be interesting to see how it goes.
Yeah, and not to be devil's advocate, but there's a lot of pluses in having a driverless society and a much safer roadway is what the data initially tells us. So it'll be a sign of the times for certain. And moving along, sticking to four wheels, Michael Mann is tapping into Ferrari. And they went there. They mentioned the G word, which is Godfather. So STX and Amazon is sort of like looking at getting on board a project that'll look or delve deeper into the Ferrari world. Are you interested in familiarizing yourself with everything that was sort of like post or pre Ford versus Ferrari world?
I'm not a car person, so.
But you like the family dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, sure. A story about a dynasty, about a rise to power, that sort of thing. Is so much, and in a huge industry. I mean, there's so much to talk about, and Michael Mann, his whole career has been about essentially in various ways, sort of men doing work, like having a specific job and focus and doing that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so this fits right into his wheelhouse. I know this film has been in development forever. Like in my playlist days, I remember writing about Ferrari like on more than one occasion as it's developed over the years. But now it seems he's gotten the green light, and I think he probably has the success of Ford versus Ferrari to thank. That was a huge hit, I think bigger than many people expected. And it helps when you have like Hugh Jackman to anchor it. I mean, that's a big star. That also helps as well. So exciting stuff. I mean, it's been 5 years since Black Hat, which I think has its fans, but was certainly not seen as a pinnacle of Michael Mann's career. So A lot of opportunity here. A lot of, and again, you're right. They bring in Deadline's report. They bring up The Godfather as a touch point, and that's that's a big brass ring to reach for sure.
Well, yeah. So just to give you guys a sense of what the project sort of like looks at is the development years of Ferrari and how he essentially had to. It was all in, and essentially how him and his wife sort of like had to team together and hedge their bets and hedge their futures. And so what people might not know is Enzo Ferrari was born in 1898 and passed away in 1988. Had a couple of sons, and one died at a fairly young age. And so he had to trust a lot of young pilots with a way to figure out his livelihood, and had to sort of like emulate sort of like parental relationship. And so what I'm imagining, what we might see is a Hugh Jackman at a later stage in Enzo Ferrari's life, perhaps played by two actors, who knows. But yeah, it's going to be something that focuses in on those relationships and how ultimately drove him to a point of insanity or to a point of success. Obviously, we know the outcome of this, but I think for me, the project becomes a lot more interesting because he's going to delve into those relationships. And I think visually, I have no idea what kind of eye candy we can expect here. What are your thoughts on how this might come, how this might be visually packaged?
That's a good question. I mean, what I didn't realize as you're sharing your thoughts, I just saw that Michael Mann was actually an executive producer on Ford versus Ferrari.
Yeah.
So no doubt he had some insight into how James Mangold approached the sequences there. But we do know Michael Mann likes to be at the forefront. He likes to be at the cutting edge, you know? So it'll be interesting to see who he brings on to shoot who he brings on to help with the sort of special, I don't want to say special effects, but the driving sequences, how he wants to approach that. But on the flip side is, I mean, if we're talking about The Godfather, is this going to be a really like lush period piece? Is this going to be more sort of like grease and grime, like roll up your sleeves kind of approach? Maybe both.
So this film is going to chart the summer of 1957, and of course Mangold's Ford versus Ferrari takes place in '66. So it's going to be fun to sort of like pair the two at some point. I believe production begins in 2021. So again, another huge title for 2022, and certainly I could see something like this hit easily go north of the 80 million mark. But yeah, another huge project for the Cannes virtual market, and that's pretty much it. Hi, I'm Eric Lavallée. I'm editor-in-chief and site owner for IONCINEMA.com, and this is
Kevin Jagernauth, contributing writer for the playlist.
And together we are IndieSponge.